Coming up on episode 387 of Wheel Bearings, we got the Honda Ridgeline Trail Sport, the Toyota GR Corolla, the GMC Terrain. Should GM sell a version of the Hyundai Staria van in the U.S.? Polestar's got an Arctic Circle collection. We drive the Toyota 4Runner, $71,000 for a Honda CRX. Cars and trucks are about to get way more expensive, and Canada is getting the Kia EV5, but the U.S. is not. All that and more coming up next. This is episode 387 of Wheel Bearings. I am Sam Abu Al-Samad from Telemetry Insights. Go ahead.
Oh,
One of you jump in.
I'm Perry Stern, writing for Auto NXT and a bunch of other publications.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Brinley from S&P Global Mobility.
And unfortunately, Nicole and Robbie are both unavailable today. Nicole's visiting her daughters in Wisconsin, and Robbie's got family medical emergency to deal with. So hopefully everything works out okay for Robbie's family. But thank you both for joining me today to talk about some stuff related to cars. Have either of you been driving anything that you'd like to talk about?
I have a Corolla GR in the driveway right now.
That sounds
Is it
fun.
at least on snow tires?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, even more fun.
It's I drove it in the snow the other day. No, it's a 6-speed manual, and I don't have the automatic version. I know they've added automatic for this year, but just scheduling, I ended up with the manual again, and I still find it to be a really charming little thing, and have just. I was going to say great value, but I've got the Premium Plus, and that's at about $45,000. For the power you're getting and for the capability, like that's not a crazy number, but it's still $45,000. So I think if I were looking at putting it in my driveway, I might go down to the Premium pack instead of the Premium Plus, because that adds some head-up display and a different audio system. And I don't know that I would need 100% of what's in there to get to the Plus. But it looks better in Plus because you've got, some matte black wheels and some other stuff. I don't know. And I like the interior with the the suede interior is nicer. So there's reasons to step up to the Plus, but, it's $45,000.
Did your money?
Yeah. Did you get a chance to drive the Marizo when it was here in the Detroit fleet?
I drove it on the original drive.
Okay.
And that was amazing, but that's hard to live with.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. I mean, I've got a neighbor here around the corner that has I think it's the Circuit Edition, which is kind of the base model.
Yep.
But I had a Marizo last year, like May or June of last year. And yeah, it's, if you want a track car, fantastic. It's great for that. If you want something as a daily driver, not so much. I haven't had a chance to drive the standard GR Corolla. But my neighbor loves his, and I mean, what is it? 39,000, I think it starts at for the
39 for the core 6MT. And 41 basically for the 8-speed, which is not crazy. So it's certainly pleasant. It's fun. It is a fun little car to drive. And you do get a lot for that money, even though I'm saying that seems like a lot of money. You do get a lot for it. Like I said, I don't feel like I need head-up display in that vehicle, and the core, which I've driven before, is still so pleasant. And if you're going to step up to this GR, sort of driving is the bigger thing anyway. So you can kind of scale back on some of the technology bells and whistles if you want to, and just experience the car.
I can see that.
Have you driven the GR, haven't you, Perry?
Actually, I have not.
Really? Oh, wow.
It just has not worked out. But and now that I know that there's one around, I may have to see if I can get into it, because I've always wanted to. I mean, it's certainly my kind of car. I mean, little pocket rocket.
Yeah.
That handles well, I think, and I could see where people would want to go for the base model if you're really getting it just for the performance aspect. Why spend the extra money on, the premium features if you don't really want them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a decent head-up display, but I'm like, this is one of the few times, and I'm like, I don't really care about head-up display in this car. I don't feel like I needed it, but it works. I mean, it's a nice system. Yeah, it's a good little thing. It is practical. I hate saying that out loud in the same word because my Miata is
Well,
not practical.
it's a 4-door. It's got, you can put 4 people in it. It's got a hatchback, which is always a good thing.
It is a good thing,
So could you use it as a daily driver?
Yesterday, stopped at Costco and Meijer, and I'm like, oh, I'm just filling this thing up.
So you could use it as a daily driver.
Absolutely, easy, very easy daily driver.
Much more so than the Morizo. I mean, the Morizo's gone now anyway. They only built 200 of them, I think, for the U.S. And that one, there's no rear seat. The back windows don't roll down. They removed most of the noise insulation, and it's loud. The ride quality is, to say the least, harsh.
Yeah.
Like I said, great track car. If you live in Michigan, not a great daily driver. But I think
winter tires, why not?
I mean, it does have all-wheel drive.
Yeah.
But it's just a little, that one's a little hard to live with. But I suspect the standard ones, the Core, the Premium, or the Premium Plus, any of those are, a great choice. And even at $45,000 for that Premium Plus, that's the starting price of a Civic Type R now.
Oh, that's true. That's true. And I don't know. Like I might stick with the GR Corolla.
Yeah. I mean, the Type R is bigger. The back seat is roomier. Mm-hmm. So it's a little more practical. But it's not quite as hardcore probably as the GR Corolla.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the GR Corolla is a more interesting blend between kind of go fast accessory look and not. And the Civic Type R tends to be in your face. Yeah. Which is good for the Type R, but that's kind of a nice thing about the Corolla. If you're looking a little bit closer, look at a little sideways, and you know what you're looking at, you're like, okay, I get it. It doesn't look like a base Corolla, but it's a little bit less visually aggressive than the Type R.
Yeah,
which
you don't have a giant wing on the back.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that just
the boy racer look.
Yeah, and if you want the boy racer look, it's a well done boy racer look, but I can see a case for having a more subtle one as well.
Yeah, my neighbor's is black, so it's black with the black wheels, and so all the stuff that they've done to it, even the wider fenders, don't really stand out to the same degree that they do, on some other colors, and certainly not to the degree that some of the Civic Type R changes stand out on that one. So it looks closer to a standard Corolla hatchback.
Stealth mode.
Yeah,
that's it. It depends if you're looking just to have fun or if you want people to know that you're having fun.
Yeah,
that's true.
There's certain people that you might want to not be quite as aware of how much fun you're having.
True.
That way. So you might want to stay away from the red in that case.
Yeah.
You don't need to say, "Hey, look at me," necessarily.
Yeah. Exactly. Cool. Any other thoughts on the Corolla GR or GR Corolla?
Not for me. I think that's it.
All right.
It's a nice little thing.
Perry, what have you been driving?
My car wasn't quite as exciting. I've been driving the GMC Terrain all week, but it's all new this year, and they gave it all the style that the rest of the GMC lineup has. So it actually looks really good. It looks a lot like the new Acadia, but smaller. They also gave it a two-tone paint, which seems basic, but it gives it a nice look. The one I'm driving has got the black package, so it's black with black wheels, black grille, and the gray silver top. So it looks nice. It's it doesn't have a lot of power, but I was actually surprised to see it's 175 horsepower, but I thought it had a lot more after driving it until I found out what it had, because it's the 1.5 turbo, so not a lot. And for 25 right now, it's only the base model, the Elevation. So AT4, which is the off-road version, and Denali will be coming for 26.
A question on the Elevation, because I will be driving this car in a couple of weeks, but I haven't had it yet. When I was in the Acadia in the elevation trim level, I was really impressed by the value in that.
Same thing. I mean, it's got that big screen. So because everything comes standard with that, the big vertical screen. I think it's 15 inch or so.
I think it's 15.
Plus the digital driver's display, which is actually one of the best laid out ones I've seen, because it has all the things I want. It's got fuel economy. It's got what's playing on the music. It's got the speed. It's got and when you're actually navigating, it swaps out the music for navigation, even if you're on Android Auto, because this one still has Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. GM hasn't killed them in these yet. But it also is the Google-based system, so you can use their Google Maps and log in, and you can download Waze, you can download Spotify and all of those things and log in if you want. But because it's got the big screen, it does have separate climate controls, and I do like that. It actually has a volume control, but some of the things are, I won't say, they aren't well thought out. Heated seats. You have to press the heated seat button, which brings up a sub-menu, and then you select whether you want cold or hot. Or if you want to turn it off, you have to go back into the sub-menu. The worst one, though, is headlights. Headlights are in the screen, and you have to hit the headlight button, and then you can choose to turn the headlights on or off. Problem is, I was out shooting photos, and I tend to turn the headlights on when I'm shooting photos, so I had the headlights on, and I shut it off, and I got the alert saying the headlights are on. You can't turn them off without starting the car back up again to get to the screen. There are no hard buttons to turn the headlights off. Not that I can find. So
I suspect that's probably not an issue for most people. I think most people are just going to leave it in auto. True. And never touch that.
However, I don't know. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten out of a car with the headlights still on and had to turn them back off again. Yeah. It might be an edge case, but it's not such a far off edge case that somebody might have decided that they didn't really care. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
And it's the same on Acadia. I mean, it's basically their new system.
Yeah.
So it's annoying, but you're right. Most people will have it on auto and will never actually touch the headlight button. But I thought it drove nice. I mean, I drove it out in the snow. They had no problems. With GM, they have you select 4-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. It's not always in all-wheel drive. But it's not a big deal. I mean, the snow, this type of weather, you just leave it in 4-wheel drive all the time, and it stays there.
And that probably helps with their EPA ratings if it's defaults to front.
I would imagine. I was getting, I think, about 26 miles per gallon over the couple hundred miles I drove it, so it's not too bad.
Yeah.
And it's got less room in it than cargo space is a little bit less than like a CRV, but it still has plenty of room. I was able to fit a couple of suitcases back there. The back seat's decent. Back seat has heaters. Had 4 of us in it last night, and had no problem fitting 2 adults in the back seat. So nice. I thought it's a nice car.
A rear seat heat is in the elevation trim. That's nice.
It's an option.
But still.
So the one I drove, I mean, it was relatively well equipped. It had premium technology package. So I think sticker on it was just over 40.
That's not bad. That's not crazy.
No, not at all.
By today's standards, yeah.
And it's a nice interior. It's it's fake leather, but it looks like real leather. It's got stitching all through the dash. So I mean, it looks like a much higher end vehicle than it really is. So I was pretty happy with it the time I drove it. I mean, it's funny. And on paper, 175 horse seems like it's going to be working like crazy, and I never really felt it was lacking for power. I mean, getting on the freeway, it's not a problem. It'd be nice if they threw Super Cruise into the lesser models, but at some point.
But that's another couple $1,000s.
Yeah, I think that's going to be on the Denali, maybe the AT4.
It'd be interesting.
But
so
you mentioned the roominess, maybe being a little bit less than the CRV. I mean, one of the things that they got rid of this year on the most recent version of the Terrain and the Equinox, the gas versions, is the sliding rear seat. Because in the past, they've always had a sliding rear seat that would move forward and back, I think about 6 or 8 inches. Mm-hmm. So, if you didn't need the cargo space, you could slide that rear seat back, several inches, and get more leg room. Do you think that would have helped if you had that?
Sorry, I cut out for a moment. Lovely internet connection. But you're saying if the sliding seats would have
Yeah,
provided
if
more
you still
space?
if it still had the sliding seats that they've always had on the previous generations of the Terrain and the Equinox, would that have helped in terms of the roominess?
It probably would have added some cargo space. But like I said, I didn't really find it lacking. So
Okay.
I don't think it was really that much of an issue.
Okay.
It's interesting they backed away from that. I wasn't Ford Escape the first to do that. I feel like
To
with
Have
the
they
sliding
taken
seats for
well,
that segment.
I don't think the
For that
Escape
segment.
ever had sliding seats until the current generation,
Mm.
and then I think they
Yeah, but the current generation's been out for a while.
yeah,
gonna
I
say.
think it came out in 2019. I think it launched. So, and I think when they
I mean,
did the refresh, they got rid of the sliding seats.
Okay, so if two of them had it and pulled it away, that means consumers aren't using it that much.
Yeah. Or maybe they just decided, that they needed
Cheaper.
to get rid of that cost. Just
That would
simplify it a
factor
little
in,
bit.
but I think to see two of them pull away from it, then two of them are getting enough feedback that it's not important enough to keep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have that much, go, you fold the seats down and, it would be an unusual situation, I think, to cut out the leg room in the back seat to fit an extra cargo.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. Well, I think that, the idea was always, that you could adjust it as needed. So if you needed extra cargo space, you could slide
Right.
the seats
Mhm.
forward, give up a little bit of rear leg room and have that extra cargo space. And then when you need it, if you weren't carrying cargo, I mean, if it's just, taking some, going out for the evening or something and you want some extra space back there, you could just slide the whole thing back.
You could put
Yeah.
tall people in the back easier.
True.
Yeah.
And there's a number of cars that do offer that still. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. And what was the bottom line price on the Terrain?
So sticker price, it starts at 30,000 for a front wheel drive. But mine fully loaded was 40,910, including destination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That feels
So-
reasonable for the content.
It's competitive.
It is, and it's a stylish car, and especially with the black pack, that it's it certainly stands out.
Mhm.
So yeah, I thought it was good.
Be curious. I'm driving one in a couple of weeks. Maybe it'll be the same one.
Yeah.
Probably.
When you have you driven the new Equinox?
Yes, it's and I would say it's obviously very similar.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that is notably different, is the dashboard layout of the Equinox versus the Terrain. And the Equinox follows the pattern of all of the other recent Chevy SUVs and trucks, where it has a landscape style center display. So it's a 17-inch center display, and then the instrument cluster. So it's up higher, closer to your line of sight. Whereas the GMCs all have that portrait style display. On the smaller vehicles like the Terrain, it's a 15-inch. On the Sierra and the top, or the Yukon, it's a 17.5-inch display, and it's mounted down lower. So it's when you need to look at something, if you want to look at the map or something like that, you're looking more away from the road. Did you notice that as you've been driving it? Were you looking more away from the road more than you have in the past, or than you did with the Equinox?
It's such a fine line. I mean, and actually, I actually drove the Equinox EV, so it's a different screen. But Traverse is the same comparison. Traverse to Acadia Equinox. The map is near the top of the screen anyway, so it's almost in the same place that you would have had it. If you had a horizontal, it had the screen across. I don't think it wasn't something that I would have noticed. Glancing down, it also, the fact that the directions, or you can even have the map showing in the driver's display, kind of takes away from that as well.
Yeah, it's kind of just because we're talking about it, I pulled up some photos, and it looks like the top level information on the GMC would be close to where the top level information is on the Equinox. There's some similarity into where your sight line would be. It's the lower part that would be distracting, which is where the buttons are on the Equinox.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, and that's such a small vehicle too. In general, there's less distance, but yeah, that's a good question to see to think about over time and see if that evolves.
The one nice thing though is the fact that all of the controls at the bottom do have buttons. So at the bottom of the screen, it looks like a kind of just a frame of the screen, but they're all physical buttons for temperature change, fan change, all of that, which it's nicely integrated, so it doesn't clutter everything up, but they're much easier to use than having to find your way over to the display screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and of course you can also just reach out and grab the vents and direct the airflow wherever you want.
Yes,
You don't have to go into a touchscreen to adjust the vents.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that. You mean there's cars? You mean there's cars that don't do that?
Yeah.
One or two.
Yes, we're talking to you, Lincoln, and Tesla, and Rivian,
and Porsche. Yeah.
And Porsche. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stop doing that.
And we'll keep talking to you about this.
Yes, we won't let it go. All right, cool. Well, I had the Honda Ridgeline Trail Sport. This Honda was doing a thing down at their down in Ohio, giving a tour to a bunch of us of their EV hub, the manufacturing changes they're doing down there. And so everybody that was driving down, they arranged for us all to get various Honda and Acura models to drive down there. Some people flew in from other parts of the country. So I got the Trail Sport, the Ridgeline Trail Sport, and it's been a couple of years since I drove a Ridgeline. And prior to the launch of the Ford Maverick, we on this show we've always recommended the Trail Sport, or the Ridgeline, I should say, as the pickup truck that probably most people should actually buy if they wanted a pickup truck, as opposed to buying a big giant, full size pickup, or especially a heavy duty pickup. For most people that want a pickup shaped vehicle, the Ridgeline was probably the best choice for most people, and to a large degree it still is for a lot of people. Although the Ridgeline is now, I think, the oldest vehicle in the mid-size pickup segment. Everything else has been redesigned, replaced over the last couple of years. You got a new Ranger, there's new Colorado and Canyon from GM, there's new Tacomas, there's new Frontiers. Everything else has been redone except the Ridgeline. And I'm guessing the Ridgeline is probably going to get redesigned in the next year to 18 months, because the rest of the vehicles that are on that platform, the Pilot, the Passport, have gotten a redesign now. And so this is probably the next one in the sequence to get reworked. It's still a good vehicle. I think for what a lot of people want a pickup truck for, it's fine. It's great. It's a decent size. It's a little bigger than something like a Maverick or a Santa Cruz, and obviously a bit more expensive, but it's also, it's got more room, more backseat room than those smaller vehicles. It's fairly comfortable to drive. I mean, the Ridgeline is basically a Pilot with a bed replacing the third row seat. And nothing wrong with that.
A bad thing. Yeah.
It's, if you need to tow a big heavy trailer, it's not going to be your first choice. I think, its maximum trailer towing is about 5,000 pounds. And, they don't offer anything like a trailer brake controller, which you may need in a lot of places, especially if you're approaching that maximum tow rating. But it's got a lot of cool features. Like there's the trunk in the bed. When when you open up the tailgate, there's a lid you can lift up, and it's got the spare tire. There's a mini spare in there. So you got the spare tire in there, and there's a pretty big storage space that's underneath the bed, which is handy, if you want to put wet stuff in there, or, lock stuff away out of sight. That's, it's good for that sort of thing. The tailgate is not as fancy as GM's different six-way folding tailgates, or some of the stuff that even that GM or Stellantis and Ford are doing. It folds down in the traditional fashion, or it swings out sideways. So you got two options there, which can be handy depending if you're carrying longer stuff, or if you're loading things into the bed. It's good for that. The Trail Sport is the more off-roady variant of the Ridgeline, just as it is for the crossovers like the Passport and the Pilot. It's not a hardcore off-roader, but it'll do for basic stuff. It's fine for going down a 2-track trail and things like that. Where you might need a little more traction than what you would get with a standard version. But if you're, it's not necessary. It's definitely not the vehicle you're going to want to take to, say, Moab. The Ridgeline starts at $39,750. All-wheel drive is standard across all 4 trim levels. There's a Sport, an RTL, the Trail Sport, and the Black Edition. The Trail Sport does have all-terrain tires on it, 18-inch wheels. So you got a little more sidewall, so it's a little more comfortable. As with most current generation Hondas, it's got all the usual array of ADAS features. It does have Honda's older infotainment system, which is okay. It's not their latest and greatest Android-based system, but it works fine. And it has support for CarPlay and Android Auto wirelessly. It's also got a wireless charging pad in there. I drove it a couple 100 miles down to near Columbus and drove back. It's not great on fuel economy, but neither are any of the other midsize pickups. It mostly highway driving. It averaged about 21 miles per gallon, which
wow. That seems pretty low.
Yeah. This is the Trail Sport, so it's got those all-terrain tires. So, there's more rolling resistance from that. And especially on the way down, it was quite windy. There was pretty strong crosswinds. So, there was that. I think overall, it's still a good mid-size pickup, that will haul a lot of mulch. You can load a lot of bags of mulch and bales of straw in the back there if you need that. Got the 280 horsepower, 3.5 liter V6, 9-speed automatic transmission. It's comfy. It's the one thing I did notice, especially on the way down to Ohio, with pretty strong crosswinds, I was getting a little bit of wind noise from somewhere around the driver's door. So it felt like maybe it was a loose seal or something somewhere, which is kind of unusual for a Honda. But aside from that, it stayed fairly stable on the road. It's got lane keeping assist and adaptive cruise control, but it's an older system. So the lane keep assist actually did a pretty good job of counteracting the effects of the crosswinds. Mm-hmm. But it's been a while since I drove one of these or drove any of these with this older adaptive cruise control system. And I forgot that on this vehicle and some of the other older Hondas, it only works at speeds down to about 20 miles an hour, and then it disengages.
Oh, so it doesn't have stop and go.
Yeah, it doesn't have full stop and go capability with the adaptive cruise.
Wow.
So once you get to 20, you actually do have to hit the brake pedal. Otherwise, you will keep rolling into that car in front of you. So
good to know.
Yeah. So keep that in mind. But aside from that, nothing else too much to complain about. Total all-in price for the one that I had, it was in the diffused sky blue pearl paint. And had the pewter gray alloy wheels with the all-terrain tires. They're General Grabber ATs. $47,347, including destination.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So, compared, if you compare that to other mid-sized trucks, that are upper trim levels, that's actually a pretty reasonable price, for, I think, like a, not quite the base Tacoma, but like the TRD Sport Tacoma, with 4-wheel drive, you're going to be paying about the same amount of money, or even a little bit more. So it's fairly competitively priced. It's well packaged. It's just, it's not the greatest towing vehicle, so if you want something for, really towing the big stuff, then you're definitely going to want a bigger truck for that. But for a general daily driver, that you can use, to do truck-like stuff, it's got you covered. And if you don't need the
motorcycles, isn't that bad?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. And you can fit a couple of those in there. So it's not bad. And if you don't need the Trail Sport, like I said, you can definitely save several $1,000s on that.
Yeah, Trail Sport is just off-road tires as far as added capability. There isn't anything
pretty
else,
much. Yeah, on the Ridgeline. I think when they do the new generation one, it'll probably have the fancier all-wheel drive system that's on the Passport, the new Passport, which is basically a retuned version of Acura's super handling all-wheel drive. So it's got the torque vectoring system on the rear axle, a dual clutch system that vectors torque to one side or the other, which will definitely give you better grip. But that is not on this generation of the Ridgeline.
Right.
All right. So that is the 2025 Honda Ridgeline Trail Sport. So we've all driven the Mach-E Rally, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
I love that car.
Well, looks like Polestar might be going that same direction with their EVs. They just announced, so far they're just one-offs, but they announced their Polestar Arctic Circle collection.
Yeah. They look like fun.
Yeah, which is basically winter rally versions of the Polestar 2, 3, and 4. And they equipped them with similar types of white alloy wheels that are on the Mach-E Rally. It's got all kinds of extra lights. And if you've ever been to northern Sweden in the wintertime, just driving around, just regular people driving their cars in northern Sweden often have these racks of additional lights, because it's a pretty remote area, very, very rural. There's not that many towns around, so it's pretty dark. The roads are not generally lit, between the towns. And so, they usually have these really powerful driving lights on the cars, and that's what they've got on these things, the type that they put on rally cars. These are all equipped with studded tires. I would love to get my hands on one of these.
Yeah.
Especially
playing around on the ice.
Absolutely. I think that would be a blast.
Mm-hmm.
Have either of you ever driven a car with studded tires?
I have not. That sounds
cool. Yeah. It's like cheating.
Yeah, it is very much so. It is. It's pretty cool. I think they've got. I think the tires on these have 4mm studs, so they're mechanically stock. So 469 horsepower on the Polestar 2, 517 on the 3, and 544 on the 4. They're lifted, anywhere from 1.8 inches to 1.6 inches. They've got extra strut braces for a little more rigidity, and then the Pirelli P0 winter tires with studs. And again, up in northern Sweden,
that'd be some good grip.
Everybody's got studded tires because they plow the roads, but they don't salt them, and so they're generally covered with snow and ice from about November till about April.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking at the pictures as we're talking about them. They do look quite cool.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That would be fun. Yeah. No, we don't need studded tires in Michigan. I mean, we just don't.
Yeah. Well, not around here.
They do plow the roads.
Yeah.
If
you're up in the UP, you'd probably want them.
Yes, in the UP, you might want them.
Yeah.
Down south, not so much. But yeah, with magic word that Sam says, they don't salt them. Plowing
Yeah.
and no salts means you just get lots of ice.
Yeah, I think, if you're on bare pavement, the studs, pavement does not like studded tires.
Nope.
So
No.
it'll tear up the pavement. But, all right.
No, that'd be a good time.
Yeah. So last week, Steph, you and I got to drive the new Toyota 4Runner out in California. Did you go on the 4Runner drive too, Perry?
No, I did not.
Okay. So Steph, what the old 4Runner was, to say the least, it was old. Yeah,
it was old.
It'd been 15 years since the 4Runner.
It was well established.
I like that. It was well established. Yeah. It was
almost old enough to drive itself.
Certainly old enough for driving lessons. Yeah. So this new one builds on so much. They had us on like 3 little off-road courses. I liked the Go Fast one better than the rocks.
Imagine that
with the TRD Pro.
Yeah. That was my favorite of the 3. But it's still, it has the capability that it should, and it's impressive that way, and just a little bit updated. And I don't feel like it lost the 4Runner feel, but it just doesn't punish you as much. So I think they moved it the right direction with this, and they're going to be careful with this product because it's a volume product and it's an internationally significant product for them. And I think they landed it. We'll talk about pricing, aren't we, Sam?
Yeah, I think overall in terms of the vehicle itself, I agree with you. I think it's a really big improvement over the old one. It's a lot easier to live with. It has a lot of this. It's built on the same architecture and kind of the whole front half of the car is basically the same as the new Tacoma. But so that means it's a little roomier. It's certainly taller, which is a good thing. In the old one, as in the old Tacoma, you were kind of sitting, your seat was kind of on the floor and your legs straight out. Not as comfortable to drive. Not great visibility. And so this one is definitely better. It's certainly got the rugged look that you might want out of an SUV. But it's also a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
It got way more expensive. So the V6 is gone. Now it's turbo 4 cylinders across the board, either just a straight up turbo 4 or the iForce Max hybrid version, which is the same engine but with an electric motor added in and a battery. That is the standard setup for the Trail Hunter and the TRD Pro and the Platinum. And then it's optional on several of the other trim levels. So as you mentioned, there were 3 different off-road courses that we got to try this on. There was a sort of slower to medium speed course that was not too technical that we did with the TRD off-road. And then we had a slower, more technical course for the Trail Hunter with some rock crawling. And then the higher speed course with the TRD Pro, which is, more, the TRD Pro is more akin to Ford's Raptor trim levels, where it's designed more for high-speed desert running. Whereas if you want something for, negotiating tough trails, then the Trail Hunter is the one for you. Yeah. But once you get up into those,
pricey. And it's interesting, and as we look at complexity of manufacturing and cost, that is part of everything, that they increase the trim levels and have 3 very different off-road oriented vehicles, and to see how that supports itself over time. Because a lot of times when you go for a new generation, you really do want to reduce complexity, and they've done kind of the opposite here.
Yeah, because there was no Platinum before, there was no Trail Hunter before. I think they added 3 new trim levels. And I think the Limited is also new.
I think they had a Limited before, but I mean, and Platinum is kind of, do you really need a Platinum? We're talking about a 4Runner. We're talking about a vehicle that is going just inherently more family oriented, more use case oriented, and it just doesn't need to be fancy. And I'm not sure that that's not sure that's the trim level that'll take very much, but they probably already know that. But it is interesting having 3 different flavors of off-road in this vehicle. They do align, and maybe it's a little bit of let's see where people go, because we do have multiple vehicles that try to fill that need, not necessarily all in one like this is doing, but we'll look at things, Trail Sport and the Pilot, and the Ridgeline, and even in the Passport coming up, a little closer to Trail Hunter, and not going quite as much as rock crawling as I expect, because I haven't driven it yet. But so it's interesting to see that they've kind of gone all 3 routes rather than sort of just picking one and going with it for their off-road capability.
Yeah, for one of the road drive segments, we did take out a TRD Sport, which is like the SR5 is the base trim level that starts at just under $41,000, and that one's actually only a few $100s more than the SR5 last year. But then from there, the next trim level up is the TRD Sport. That's a $7,000 jump to get to the TRD Sport. And when we drove that one on the road, and and the one that we had, I think, was actually just over 50,000 with the options that were on it. That did not feel like a $50,000 car. Yeah, it was all hard plastics. There was no locking differentials or anything on that one. When you get up into the higher trim levels, the materials get a little bit nicer, but that TRD Sport felt genuinely kind of cheap,
right?
Especially for something that cost $50,000.
So, I mean, 4Runner's always had such a loyal following. Do you think that loyal following is going to like the new one?
Oh yeah,
they've been very traditional before.
I do think they will. It is, and it stays very traditional. A lot of the upgrades are about making it not 15 years old, because you have to eventually update the platform. But yeah, it is very, very much in keeping with what a 4Runner owner would expect. Like, the question will just be, can they take the cost of that? If they can, then Toyota's good to go, because it's they know that the personality of 4Runner stayed true and true. And even the inexpensive plastic, or the cheap feeling plastic in the Sport, for me, feels like it's more in line with 4Runner personality, right? Because it always seemed like it might, partly because it was getting a little bit older, but it always seemed like it was much more about function than it was about comfort.
Definitely.
So, a plastic piece on a TRD Sport doesn't seem crazy in that context. But when you add the $50,000 price point in there, and you add that the consumers are changing a little bit, right? The expectation is for a bit more. That they might scoff at the price a little bit, but the personality is there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's just that it's not like I say, it's not just the plastic interior on that TRD Sport, but you also don't get any of the off-road, the really good off-road features that you would get when you step up to even the TRD off-road trim level, which that starts at 50,000. And I think the one that we drove that was the hybrid, and it was a premium, so it was a TRD off-road iForce Max premium, or premium iForce Max, I think it's the correct nomenclature. And that one, that was $58,000.
Yeah.
And then when you get up to the TRD Pro, that I think that TRD off-road premium is actually probably kind of the sweet spot for most people that want a really off-road capable 4Runner, because that's where you start to get things like the locking diffs. You can get the front sway bar disconnect, and other features like that you're going to need off-road. If you just want one for driving on the road, then the TRD Sport, or even the standard TRD off-road, which, like I said, starts at 50,000, is probably a better choice for you. That TRD Pro at $67,000, the 2024 4Runner TRD Pro was $55,000. Is $12,000 more expensive. than it was
Yeah.
before.
That's-
Now,
That's
it
a lot
does
of
have
noise.
a lot more power. It's got a lot of cool features in there, for off-roading. You've got locking, you got a 2-range transfer case, you got locking front and rear diffs, you've got the sway bar disconnect, and a bunch of other things. One other detail, if you opt for one of the hybrids, and the same thing is also true on the um, why am I blanking on the other SUV? The Land Cruiser. The
Yeah.
Land
Oh,
Cruiser.
okay.
If you get the Land Cruiser, the battery is basically stuck in the floor of the rear cargo compartment.
Yeah.
So it's about 3 inches taller, 2 or 3 inches taller, for liftover height. So the floor is basically lifted up several inches to accommodate the battery under there. And so you do lose some cargo space. On the SR5, you can get the SR5 with a third row seat option, which apparently there was one there. I didn't see it,
I didn't see it either.
but apparently there was one there. But that third row is very tight in this vehicle, so you probably don't want to do that.
You probably don't want to do that. Just for this it gets pricey, and it looks like, just at a glance and not going sort of spec by spec, it looks like it's a little more expensive than the Bronco. And they're not 1-for-1 competitors, but they're close enough.
Say,
That's
kind of the same audience.
should be close to the same audience. I think that the 4Runner is a little bit more livable than the Bronco, actually. But there are similar audiences, especially for the TRD Pro and the Trail Hunter, and the 4Runner's coming in a little bit more. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out a little bit, because 4Runner wants more people. I mean,
and it'll probably sell more than the Bronco just because of the loyalty to the brand. The hybrid is 326 horsepower, 465 foot-pounds of torque. It'll tow 6,000 pounds, so it's pretty good in that respect. But I was looking up the Bronco, for comparison, and you can get a Bronco. Let's see, you can get a 4-door Bronco. See the like the Outer Banks, or the Heritage Edition is 50,000.
And
and that's
the Heritage
that's got,
Limited Edition is 70.
Yeah,
right.
And that at that price point, you've got most of the off-road goodies,
Right.
And if you went for one of the cheaper trim levels, like a Big Bend, you can still get, you can add on the really good off-road capabilities, like the Sasquatch package is available on there for a couple grand. So you can, for under $50,000, you can get a lot more for your money
in terms of off-road.
Yeah.
But again, Bronco is a little bit, I think, is a little bit less livable. Bronco is noisier. Bronco got a different personality from it, and you've got seating for everybody, but I think the Toyota manages packaging a little bit better. So that's an interesting sort of thing, because I think in some respects, at the end of the day, it'll be the personality that decides whether they go Bronco or whether they go 4Runner, more so than the cost. But cost be hard to say why you would go for the 4Runner if you're just going pure cost.
Yeah, I just priced it out here. So a 2025 Bronco Big Bend with the Sasquatch package comes to $53,000, and that's with an automatic, and the that's removable hard top, I think, or removable soft top. That's the soft top. So that's one of the things with the Bronco and with the Wrangler that you can't get on the 4Runner is there's no open air driving. Although on the 4Runner, it does have a slide down rear window in the tailgate. Although we could not figure out how to do that.
No, couldn't find that button.
Yeah,
could not find that button.
Looked everywhere.
Yeah, well, and that's the trade-off though with the open air driving on the Wrangler and the Bronco. That's one of the reasons those two are fundamentally noisier.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
and that's they're both as quiet as they can be, and Wrangler is certainly, this generation is better than it ever was before. But there's a big box with a removable roof or a soft top, and there's a lot of noise to get over that you can't really. And so that's one of the reasons that 4Runner is going to be fundamentally quieter, and I think it feels a little bit more livable on a day to day. I feel like the Bronco and the Wrangler end up being more like you're really focused on the adventure side and the going off road or the driving someplace, but you want a little bit of space for the kids. Where 4Runner is kind of more the opposite. Like your priority is more your family, but this way you can also have a little bit of hobby too. So I think that might be, from a buyer's perspective, kind of where you land on that. It's where do you prioritize the off-road versus what you need for family and friends for moving them around. And if you're a little bit more on the family and friend side, then 4Runner's more livable. If you're a little bit more on the off-road side, and I'll move my friends if I have to, and I don't care if they're comfortable, then we go Bronco. So it's just a different mindset.
Yeah.
Neither's right or wrong, but interesting.
One other detail about the 4Runner Trail Hunter version is like the Tacoma. It's got that snorkel, the high air intake, which if you drive with the passenger side window open, you will hear a lot of noise from the air getting sucked through that snorkel. Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, you'll hear the turbo and everything else through that coming out of the top of that snorkel. So you might want to take one for a test drive to make sure that you can always just close the window and the problem kind of goes away. But, if you want to drive with the windows down, when you're on the trail, that might be an issue for you.
That might be.
So yeah, so 4Runner much better, much improved, but also a lot more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I was, I get every Saturday morning, I get this email from Hagerty with some of the articles that they've published that week. And this week, one of the things that they had was a report on the Mecum Kissimmee auction in Florida. So this time of year, there's a whole bunch of auctions that happen in Arizona and in Florida of classic cars. And, most of the stuff on this list of, the 10 cars on this list, were pretty much the usual kind of things that you see. There was a 1970 Plymouth Superbird, 67 Corvette L89, a Viper, a first-gen Viper. And then as I was scrolling down this article, I noticed a 1991 Honda CRX SI.
Yeah.
So the CRX was a cool little car, really small. It was based on the Civic. It was a two-seat hatchback. Back in the day, it was a fun little car.
Mm-hmm. It
$71,500 somebody paid for this thing.
It does only have 326 miles on it, for what it's worth. Theoretically.
Yeah,
but yes, that is insane. There are a lot of other things I think I'd buy for $71,000, but
yeah, I feel like that's
but I suppose if you already have everything,
or if you're just really fond of it, and 326, and it's not like there's a lot of them around anymore.
Yeah, I mean, most of them have
certainly not at 326 miles.
But yeah, that's a lot of money for a CRX. Even I mean, this was a car that sold for, I think, barely $10,000 when it was new. Yeah, if that. It might have even been less than that. So that's a lot of change for a CRX.
Yeah.
There was also a presidential limousine, Bill Clinton's presidential limousine, that went for $264,000. But who cares? All right. So, have either of you been to South Korea?
I have not. I would love to.
I have not either. It's on my list. Places I want to go.
So one of the things when you're driving around in cities in South Korea that you see a lot of is these minivans that are often being used as taxis or as livery vehicles, and one of the more popular ones out there is the Hyundai Staria, which is interesting. It's kind of a spaceship looking vehicle. It's kind of like, if you remember the GM Dustbuster minivans of the early 1990s. Yeah, it's kind of like that concept done better.
I was gonna say, it looks a lot nicer.
Yeah,
than those.
Yeah, less Dustbuster.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Motor Trend had a story about the possibility of this one being brought over and rebadged and sold as a GM vehicle as part of the deal that GM and Hyundai did last year to do some collaboration on future vehicles. And they're speculating that maybe they could bring the Staria over here. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's a market for something like this in the U.S.?
Basically, a cool minivan.
Yeah.
No.
No, you don't think so?
Not a big one.
Okay.
And it would be more interesting if they were going to do that.
This is not a huge vehicle. This is this is similar in size to to a Sienna or Kia Carnival or Odyssey or Pacifica.
I think the more interesting part of the comment was that Hyundai said it would be their way to get into the commercial part of the business. So and how do you get over import stuff? But it feels more like Hyundai wants than GM wants necessarily. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes through. But it might be more interesting, as this article talks about too, to look at the PV Kia products, because part of the benefit of this whole tie-up would be that you're saving some cost and sharing some development of electric vehicles and things and plug-in hybrids and things like that. So you want to use something new, right? You want to go and do something new rather than sticking with something a little bit older. But I feel like little vans like that, it's not even that little, but vans like that's just, it sounds good on paper. And, Transit Connect is gone. And this
is quite a bit bigger than a Transit Connect or
a
Ram ProMaster City.
I'm feeling like there's not a ton of space in there for that. And cost is huge because, commercial, it has to have a commercial base almost in order to support the passenger, unlike anything else. Having a commercial base to support the passenger base would be important too. So you have to have the cost down enough for commercial buyers to take it. I feel like there's enough minivans out there that and enough capacity to build minivans that if there was a secret little minivan stash of buyers that they have stuff to buy, and we'd see some uptick in there. We don't even expect ID Buzz to be a huge seller, right? That's pretty niche.
Yeah.
Maybe in that space.
And that's about the coolest minivan you're going to find.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Sticking with Hyundai Motor Group for a second, the Kia EV5 is apparently going to Canada, but it's not coming to the U.S. So this is a crossover, that's in a similar size class to CRV, RAV4, that kind of compact-ish crossovers, and it's one of the lower cost EVs that Kia has launched. They've also got the EV3, which supposedly we might be getting next year, although now who knows. But Canada is going to get the EV5.
And I think that had sort of been announced before, that had been discussed previously. And it just says that they don't have confidence that it's the right vehicle for the U.S. market. I think is really where they're at. Whether it's the combination of cost and size, that they're having better opportunity with others. But it is here, at least in Canada. So that does mean if they change their mind or if there's other opportunity, it probably wouldn't be too hard to bring it here. But at this particular point in time, they don't think this is the right market for it.
Which is too bad. It seems like it should be a market for it. I mean, because the compact crossovers is among the best-selling vehicles in America. To have a stylish electric version seems like that would do well.
How did you choose which internet service provider to use? Well, if you're like most people in the U.S., you probably didn't actually really have a choice. You probably had one, or maybe if you're lucky, two choices of an ISP. The sad thing is most of us don't have that choice because ISPs operate mostly like monopolies or at best duopolies in the regions they serve. They then use this monopoly power to take advantage of customers. Data caps, bandwidth throttling, the list goes on. But worst of all, ISPs have the ability to keep a log of every website you visit, and so can a ton of other third parties, unless you use ExpressVPN. Without ExpressVPN, these third parties can still see every website you visit, even in incognito mode, because all that mode does is after your session's done, it erases your cookies and your history. But while you're surfing, your ISP, your mobile network provider, the administrators of your Wi-Fi network, like your school, your boss, or your parents, they can all log and see everything you're doing. ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure, encrypted servers, so third parties can't see your browsing history. ExpressVPN is the best VPN service because it hides your IP address, making it extremely difficult for third parties to track your online activity. It's really easy to use. Just fire up the app, and there's one button to click, and you are connected and protected. And it works on all of your devices. I use it on my phones, my laptops, my desktop machines, my tablets, everywhere, everything that I use that I want to stay private on the go. And it's been rated number one by all the top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. So in my job as an analyst and as an automotive journalist, I do a lot of traveling. I spend a lot of time in airports, a lot of time in hotels, coffee shops, and every one of those places that has Wi-Fi, if I connect to it, whoever's running that Wi-Fi service for that facility, as well as usually anybody else in the vicinity, might be able to pick up and track what I'm doing and capture things like passwords and other data that I'm transmitting. So if I want to check my bank while I'm on the road, I don't want anybody else seeing that information. So I've been using ExpressVPN for years. Every time that I log on to anywhere, first thing I do is connect ExpressVPN before I do anything else. So protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/wheelbearings. That's expressvpn.com/wheelbearings. And you can get an extra 4 months for free. expressvpn.com/wheelbearings.
But obviously they've
but
done more research than
it's
me.
also a crowded segment, and there's a bunch of EVs in that segment already. Now,
Sure.
unless they could find a way to sell that, sell something like the EV5, for, say $35,000 or less, then it's going to be, it's going to be going up against, the VW ID4 and the Toyota BZ4X and a whole bunch of other things that are already out there. And it's especially right now with the way the policies are changing, and the fact that EVs are probably about to get a whole bunch more expensive. It just may not be worth it.
And we're still at a point where EV adoption is not non-existent. It's happening, but it's still happening kind of slowly. In 25, 26, maybe even 27 aren't really going to be the big years, right?
Yeah.
And they have homologated it. So they could in 28 if they needed, or the next generation of it, or the facelift version of it. They could now. It just might partially be about timing. How many more would automakers like to see a little bit more uptick in the vehicles that exist before they start adding to the mix? We had 40, give or take, compact crossovers before we started adding EVs.
Yeah.
So we've also got a space that's got 48 or 50 nameplates, and that's a lot of choice for consumers to bear. And it means that everybody's volume is going to be a little bit lower for having that much choice. So it might be a little bit of, maybe not right now. In a couple of years might be the right time.
Speaking of EVs that we're not going to get, the VW ID7. Who's surprised at that?
Nope. Not really.
I was actually
I want
kind of
Americans to start buying sedans again, but they aren't right now.
I was actually kind of shocked, at CES a couple of years ago when they said, when they first showed it, with camouflage, and they said, "Yep, we're going to bring this to the U.S. market." And it's like, great, but
it's a beautiful car. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful car, but you're right. I don't see it. I mean, it's not what people are looking for.
I mean, I would love to see something like this offered, but
enough people, yeah.
And it would be next to the ID Buzz, so then you'd have two vehicles that are relatively lower volume because they're going to have more limited buyers, and you really need to do something a little bit different. You need to get into something with a little bit more accessibility.
So it's probably a smart move.
Yeah, at least for now.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things that exists. So maybe in 29, maybe the next generation of it, maybe like as things evolve, it maybe a different version, a different generation of it can come. But right now they decided it wasn't the time.
Yeah, I mean it's probably too expensive, not competitive enough, in a market that is increasingly disenchanted with sedans to begin with,
right?
And is likely to get much more disenchanted with EVs in the next couple of years. It wouldn't have made sense for VW to bring that thing here.
No.
Not unless they could build it in Chattanooga alongside the ID4, because it's on the same platform. But
yeah.
All right. So last big topics for today are vehicle cost. I mean, we talked about, the cost of the 4Runner. Affordability has been a big issue for a long time now. And it's become increasingly a challenge for people to afford to buy new vehicles. And it looks like in the coming weeks and months, it's going to get a lot more expensive to buy pretty much anything in the U.S. and any vehicles in the U.S. because as of yesterday, when we record this, Trump administration officially announced 25% tariffs on products coming in from Canada and Mexico. That's a major issue for the auto industry because, a lot of vehicles that are sold here are built in either Canada or Mexico. A lot of the vehicles that are sold here use components and systems that are produced in Canada or Mexico. A lot of stuff that goes into cars. I mean, there's thousands of parts in a car, a truck, SUV. Many of those parts cross borders multiple times.
Yep.
And the way tariffs work, every time something crosses the border, whoever's bringing that across the border has to pay the tariff. It's not paid by the government. It's paid by the companies that are bringing that stuff across the border, whether that's the manufacturer, the distributor, whoever it might be. And those prices ultimately end up getting passed along to consumers because, especially in the auto industry, they don't have 25% profit margins that they can absorb a 25% tariff. You're talking 6-8% profit margins at best in the auto industry. And, so those increases are going to get passed along to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no question. I mean, it's, and you said, for parts, I mean, the profit margins are oftentimes even less. Mm-hmm. And so, everything is going to cost too much. And so it's
more than too much because they already cost too much.
Right. I mean, what's the average price of a new car right now? Is over 40 now, isn't it?
It's just under 48. I think it's like 47 something now.
Right. Which is well beyond what a lot of people can afford anyway. And so add 25%, it's kind of crazy.
And it's also something that automakers and suppliers can't adjust quickly.
Yeah.
And not understanding because it's not clear in the president's comments exactly how long or what the countries are supposed to do to get out from under the tariffs. That issue is open. You don't know how to plan for how long. You just make up a number, right, and assume, because in order to move production and actually really change your global sourcing footprint in order to address this is going to take a couple of years.
Definitely.
For the most part, you can't just do anything. I mean, Toyota is super exposed with the RAV4. It's built in Canada. and that's all you got. There isn't a lot to move things around. Honda, you look at Honda's footprint, and their plants are more or less flat out. So it's not just move it here, shift a little bit there. So it's going to be much more difficult to adjust things like that for most. We might, then see, production slip for some of the vehicles that are tariffed. So we're going to see another situation. Precisely how it plays out, wait to see. But we're going to see another situation where, as we did after semiconductors, where the mix that's available changes based on what they can build and how that cost comes through, and on what vehicles you can pass some of that on and how much. We're probably not going to see automakers just add 25% on top of everything. They're going to try and figure out a way to maximize that. A flat 25% to consumers, I think, will be very difficult. So they're going to have to absorb some of it, but it still has to go up. And how much does it go? And some of that could be in changing the product mix that's available for consumers.
Which is what we saw happen with the chip shortage,
Right.
when they prioritized their highest margin vehicles, and that's when we saw the average transaction price go from $38,000 to $48,000 practically overnight. So that's a big problem. And as Stephanie said, the RAV4, the Toyota RAV4 is the best-selling nameplate in the U.S. after the Ford F-Series and the GM full-size pickup trucks. And, that's, it was about 430,000 vehicles in the U.S. last year. All of those are built in Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Honda builds, several 100,000 Civics and CRVs in Ontario. They also build them in the U.S., but they build a lot of them in Ontario. And those are two of their best-selling products. For Stellantis, the Jeep Compass, also heavy duty pickup trucks, also the new Jeep Wagoneer S, all built in Mexico.
And the upcoming midsizer is coming out of Mexico as well.
The
one that's not named.
Oh, okay. The Cherokee replacement.
Right.
Yeah.
And they, there's potential to adjust some. Stellantis has some potential to adjust some of the truck production, but again, it takes time.
Yeah.
Right.
It can't be done quickly. Interesting. I was earlier when we were talking about Bronco, I had the Ford site open, and the Ford website has a thing about F-150 powerful V8s. A legacy we're keeping alive is like the front and center. Interesting for the times. The V8 for the F-150 comes out of Canada. So you're going to have things like that where the F-150 is built here, but the engines are someplace else. All of these parts going back and forth. Toyota Camry built here. Parts are coming from everywhere. So you're going to see production costs come up.
The Ford Maverick and Bronco Sport,
yes,
both built in Mexico. And there was just a story in Automotive News the other day that GM is cutting one of its production shifts at its Ramos, Mexico assembly plant, where they build the gas Blazer as well as the electric Equinox and Blazer and the Honda Prologue and the upcoming Cadillac Optic. They're all built in Ramos. They're cutting a shift of production there because Honda has reduced their orders for the Prologue, even though the Prologue was the best selling of all the GM built EVs last year. Honda's cutting their orders because they expect sales to drop, both because of the tariffs and also losing the tax incentives. And Honda's plan when they launched, their target was to sell close to 40,000 of those in 2024 and 60,000 a year from 2025 onward.
Please.
And now they clearly see that they're not going to be able to sell that many because they just can't get the price down.
Well, and side note on Prologue being one of the best, it has definitely sold well, but it also had a couple of months on the Equinox.
Yeah,
it was available a couple months earlier, and I think that made a little bit of a difference there. And the General Motors was filling their contract too, so production might have skewed a little bit to Prologue. And the other part is Prologue was anecdotally huge incentives, huge discounts on Prologue. So they were making it very attractive, as GM Chevrolet has done with the Equinox, making it very attractive with with their own incentives as well. So some of that sales bump in that first year, I don't, if it was as tied up into manufacturers' incentives as was, it's difficult to sustain anyway.
Yeah.
Even without the environment changing. So yeah, I think it's significant that they pulled a shift down already, to say, yeah, this is going to be harder. It's going to be harder next year, not easier.
Yeah, and I expect we're going to see more shifts cut and more. We're probably going to see a lot more production cuts in the coming months. As the prices,
coming weeks even.
Yeah, the stuff that's already in inventory as of now. There's not going to be any increase on those. The tariffs don't apply to those. Starting on Tuesday, which is February 4th. They anything crossing the border then will have the tariff applied to it. So if you need a new car, a new truck, new SUV, highly recommend that you go buy it
off
now.
the lot now.
Yes, go find what you can in inventory, if you can find what you need, and buy it now, because a few weeks from now, when that inventory, a couple months from now, when that inventory is depleted, everything that's coming in at that point is going to be a lot more expensive. So get it while you can. And
it's going to be interesting as we watch it out too, because a soft spot in this is going to be suppliers who can't absorb it. There's going to be suppliers who just cannot function with that, and whether or not the contracts are written for an OEM to pay for the shipping or not, tier one and OEMs will figure this stuff out. But you look at some of the smaller suppliers, and we're going to have some problems in the supplier base, and that usually is bad for the industry. It doesn't go better when the smaller suppliers are having issues, and we're already in a situation where we've got the major OEMs, cutting staff, really all of them. I mean, you look at Europe and you look at Volkswagen and they're having problems, and you look at Ford and GM and Stellantis all cutting, and you look at Nissan cutting. I think Honda and Toyota are not. They might not be cutting. They might be the only ones. We're seeing automakers buckle down in the face of everything again, which is good to buckle. I mean, they've got to do it to survive.
Right, they have to, yeah.
But automotive shedding jobs is usually not a good sign for what's going to happen with the economy in the next couple of years. It's maybe something.
Yeah, because there's a lot of other jobs that depend on people working in the automotive industry. I think the estimate is roughly about, for every direct auto industry job, there's about 7 other jobs that are supported by that in other businesses, where people that work in the auto industry spending money, and so there's a huge cascading effect from what happens to the auto industry. And if, I'm guessing, my projection that I'm working on right now, we're probably going to see about 1.5 to 2 million vehicles fewer sold this year compared to last year.
Could be.
I could see that.
I'll give you our estimate in a couple of days. We're still working on that. Jobs, all 3 of our jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. All right. On that cheery note, let's answer a couple of listener questions. We had a couple of listener emails. First up, Robert from Anaheim, who we answered. We read his previous email a couple weeks ago. And he says, to Nicole's comment about that being very specific. So for the two of you, Robert wrote in to tell us about a Rove charging station in Anaheim, which has all kinds of cool features. They had they had a restaurant there and a bunch of other stuff. And it's very convenient, lots of chargers. Anyway, said Nicole, and he gave us the actual address of it. And Nicole commented that was very specific. So my intent was to share this DC fast charging and convenience store. It doesn't have the nationwide name recognition like Electrify America, Tesla, or the others, and perhaps most of the listeners are familiar with. So I put the address in case local Southern California residents were listening and were not aware of it. Rove has not made much of an effort to advertise themselves, but I want to encourage this business model for others, something that might prove a challenge with the new administration. If you find yourselves in the area and decide to try it out, be aware that the cables for CCS chargers are very thick and heavy, which is true for most CCS chargers.
Yeah.
At one point in its early opening, the station did offer a small dog park for pet owners. On my last visit, though, it seems to have been removed. Robbie, I too stopped learning my Spanish by 9 or 10. I keep meaning to Google the name since it doesn't sound familiar with me. Lastly, as a happy owner of a German-built 2022 VW ID4 rear-wheel drive, I was at my VW dealer for my 40,000-mile maintenance check. I also scheduled door handle replacement and software update. Let's see, the door handle replacement and software update for Monday, which lands on MLK Day, which I have off. Figured I'd get all three out of the way. I was contacted Saturday before the appointment that the door handle replacement couldn't be done as they no longer have parts available. I asked, can't the software still be done? And since I'm primarily there for maintenance check, it would be convenient to me. I was told yes. Come Monday, I was informed that it was not recommended to do the software update until the door handle replacement was done. It had been causing problems per customer feedback. I was irked, but regardless, I was there for my maintenance primarily. So went in and sat in the waiting room, finished my coffee. When listening to the podcast, you read my mail. I got so excited as if it was live on the air over the radio. It took me a moment to realize it was mostly the 4 cups of coffee that morning that are limiting myself that I had that morning after limiting myself to 1 last year for weight loss. Still, I appreciate heard and that you showed interest in trying out Rove and giving your opinion on it. I look forward to hearing about it. FYI, the dealer I got my ID4 from, VW of Puente Hills, is next to the Puente Hills Mall, where they shot the Back to the Future mall scene. Please keep up the great podcast with informative and humorous delivery that brings us back to your podcast over and over again. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for writing back in and giving us that update. And yeah, it's it always sucks when there's a recall and dealers can't actually get the parts they need to do the recalls.
Yeah.
And that's going to be another thing that will be affected by this as well, I'd imagine.
Yep. Absolutely.
Uh-huh. Yep. Warranty recall costs just went up.
Yeah.
Finally, from Daniel, what is your perspective on the claims about weak EV demand or similar? Don't EVs first need to exist at reasonable prices and be available across the U.S. in order to make the claim that it's a demand problem? That sounds more like a supply issue, not demand. To me, when EV demand is used, it actually is often EV supply. If the articles and talking points said weak or developing EV supply, the claims would make more sense. For example, if we look at the top 25 selling vehicles in the U.S., how many of them have a plug-in hybrid? Hat tip to John Volker for actually plugging in the PHEV and or a full EV option. Or if the model doesn't offer the option of a plug-in powertrain, what do OEMs offer as a similar equivalent EV in the same market segment with similar pricing and widespread availability as their best sellers? If EVs existed across the top selling models, then we look at that data and see what's selling or not. If that existed, then we could talk about EV demand. However, many of the best-selling vehicles don't offer a plug-in option or equivalent, and despite this relative lack of product, EV sales hit nearly 10% last year in the U.S. Perhaps the sole vehicle market segment with plenty of EV options is those priced at $80,000 and up. That being said, there's finite demand for expensive $80,000 vehicles, whether they are powered by gasoline, electricity, or crocodile tears. What do you all think? Keep up the great work.
Nope, I think it's a demand problem. I'll start there. And it's a regional demand problem in some ways. I think it's a demand problem because infrastructure is not fully there yet. I think and consumer education isn't fully there yet, which isn't to say there's not demand, but to get from 10% to 20 or 30 or 40% is not just a supply problem. Supply is part of it because we couldn't build 40% tomorrow if we wanted to. He's right about that for sure, but we're not ready. We are not ready for that. We're 3 of us are in Michigan, so it's cold and cold is still a problem. Cold is still a problem. Finding enough chargers around if you don't have one hooked to your house is still a problem. It's a lot of housing stock that you can't really put it onto your house very easily. Trust me, I'm shopping. um, and so I think there's still some legitimate concerns. And earlier I said in 2 or 3 or 4 years we would be looking at a much different dynamic. I think we need to catch up. And once some of those things are settled down, then you're going to have more and more consumer demand. I think there's a lot of consumer curiosity. I think there's a lot of consumer interest. I don't think plug-in hybrids are the same. So I think that shows interest, but it doesn't solve the problem. And so I still think it's a demand issue more than it is a supply issue, though supply is related.
Well, I think it's actually both supply and demand. I think the problem is there's not enough demand for what is being supplied. We don't have the right kind of supply. We don't have a supply of affordable vehicles. And I think if there was, there would be more demand for it.
I'm on the fence.
Charging is also a big part of the equation as well.
I'm on the fence on that, because if we look at an average transaction price of $48,000, you can get EVs at $48,000. We just talked about GM killing a shift that builds the Prologue and the Equinox. Those are affordable in the context of what average costs are today. So for new car buyers, and I realize that means that there's some buyers that can't. I'm not on board with the idea that if it were $30,000, more people would buy it. But I don't think that's the trigger for the demand. I think that you still have to have the fundamental interest, and I think there's still enough challenges that for right now. I mean, in our forecast to put this up, our forecast is for about before tariffs was for about 11% demand for EVs in the U.S. for 2025. So it's growing, it's happening, but I think it's taking a lot longer. And if supply were the problem, GM would not have cut another shift and said,
right.
No,
I think you're right. I think you're right. If there was the demand for them, they would be building them. They would, keep up with that. But I think, to your point, it is the infrastructure. It is the education. People don't really understand exactly how it works. Whether, there are a lot of people that an electric car would probably work perfectly for, but they don't know that.
they don't.
And to your point about the home charging. I mean, I put a home charger in my house, and it was a completely different experience when I have an electric vehicle where, I plug it in when I get home, and the next morning I have a fully charged car again. Where before I had that, I had to go out searching for, I found a level 2 charger that was a 10-minute walk from the house, so I could go leave a car there for a while and come back, and it was just annoying. And so it makes a huge difference.
It's foundational level of difference, whether it can work or not work. I don't have a charger at my house now, so every time I test, it's a hassle, and I don't blame the electric vehicle for that. That is just part of the condition right now. So it doesn't mean the electrics are bad, but every time I'm in one, I'm like, if I had a home charger, all of my problems, all of the concerns that I have about this electric vehicle would be solved, and I can see lots of use cases where it would not be a problem for me at all. 250-mile range, 200-mile range probably wouldn't be an issue in most of my life. I don't do a ton of road trips, and if I did, I could deal with it or rent a car. Occasionally I'll have a day where I go 150 miles, but finding an external charger, a DC fast someplace when it's something you do once or twice a month is not a hassle. When you're trying to figure out how to keep a vehicle charged all the time, then that gets to be a problem. So all of my concerns about range would go away if I had a home charger.
Right. I mean, it's if you were actually in the market for an electric car and had no way to put a home charger in, that would be a deal breaker right there.
It is.
And that,
that's what you're dealing with right now.
And that's the fundamental problem with really expanding the EV market beyond the early adopters and I forget what the term is for the next group. But
the next adopter.
Basically, the people that buy new vehicles, which are a small minority of the overall market. You sell about 3 times as many used vehicles in this country every year as new vehicles. And as you start to get beyond the new vehicle market to the rest of the market, you're looking at, somewhere between 40 and 50% that, don't live somewhere where they can charge at home. or where they can have dedicated off-street parking, and that becomes a real issue for owning an EV. And until we make public charging ubiquitous, not just DC charging, because that is a far too expensive solution, but curbside charging,
right,
making that ubiquitous in places where people live and work, then you're going to really start to see it take off. In the meantime, the growth is going to continue to be much smaller. And in fact, I think for the next couple of years, there's a strong possibility that we will actually see a decline in EV sales for the next year or two because of the tariffs that we talked about, because of the loss of incentives and the lack of more affordable options.
Well, and as we change regulations, it's gonna change the focus.
Yeah,
really, it will. But as we talk about this, I think we've talked about this on this show before about the importance of home charging or public charging. To your point, Sam, curbside charging or apartment structures that deal with it a little bit differently. But we talk about the fact that home charging needs to be something that needs to be resolved, but there's not as much effort or energy poured into that.
Yeah, everybody's focused on trying to reproduce the gas station model with charging, right. And that is not the right solution.
It's not the problem. Yeah. But I mean, and I say that knowing full well that that's a very difficult one, because the home charger that you stick on your wall is not that expensive.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of housing stock that isn't ready for it. And the cost to get a house ready for it can be really not much of anything, or it can be really expensive. And apartments and condos are also an issue. Off-street parking. There's a couple of solutions that are that have been floated around in New York and Montreal, I think, where you've kind of put the charger into a light pole.
Right,
so
and that's
interesting things coming up like that, but they aren't getting the level of attention. And how do you if you're going to put federal money into it, and I'm not sure that that's the best answer, but if you're going to put federal money into it, how do you figure out how to help make sure that homeowner scenario or apartment scenario, that at-home charging is the breaker there. Initially, when EVs were a few years ago, the conversation was about work or home, right? But even work chargers aren't enough to be able to support a big change like that. You need to have a base where you're going to charge pretty consistently, pretty much. Even if you don't only charge every couple of days or whatever, you need that to help this work, and that's just not where the money is going right now.
Yep. All right. On that note, time to wrap up. I want to say thank you both so much for taking the time to join me at the last minute today.
Thanks for having me back. It was fun.
That was fun.
And I do have one more thing that after we say goodbye, keep listening. I had a call a couple of days ago with Dave Richardson, who is the Senior VP of Software and Services Engineering at General Motors. Dave came to GM in the fall of 2023 after a 12-year stint at Apple. And middle of last year, he took over as head of all the software and services engineering for GM. And very interesting conversation about some of the challenges GM's faced, how they're trying to tackle those. We talked about Apple CarPlay on the EVs and why they took it away and why it's probably not coming back. A bunch of other stuff. So stick around, have a listen to that, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye. Hey everyone, it's Sam. I had a chance to sit down today with Dave Richardson, the Senior Vice President of Software and Services Engineering at General Motors. So Dave, for the last, since June of last year, has overseen all of the software development, software engineering, validation, testing at GM. And lots been changing under his tenure. He spent 12 years at Apple before coming to GM, and we had a very interesting conversation about the differences in working on software at a company like Apple versus GM. Also got into some discussion of CarPlay as well as AI. Enjoy. So, Dave, we haven't had a chance to chat before, but I have talked to some of the other folks over the last few years from GM's software team.
You bet.
And so, you've been GM, about a year and a half now, I think?
I joined in fall of 23.
Yeah.
And then stepped up to this role in, last summer, I think. When I first got here, I had really like the digital service software side of the business, OnStar, kind of everything that was off the vehicle, as well as some of the vehicle software itself.
Mm-hmm.
And now the role is really all of software and services engineering. So think of that like IT all the way through firmware, mechatronics, vehicle software, off vehicle, ADAS, all that kind of stuff. So, pretty fun, exciting role. Lots of stuff to do though, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. So, coming over from Apple to a company like GM, it seems like that would probably be a pretty radical change for you, in terms of, obviously in terms of product, but in terms of the way that the companies work. What's been the biggest adjustment for you, coming into an automaker, as opposed to, a consumer electronics company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, reflecting on it, I think some things are quite different, but there are a lot of things, and maybe this surprised me a bit, there are a lot of things that are actually very similar. And so, maybe your question, what surprised me the most? I think I didn't really understand, just the level of care and complexity that goes in when you're building software for safety critical systems. Right? And, the whole manufacturing aspect of that, how you bring quality, how you bring safety, and then how you take, Apple, and I think a lot of big tech have figured out how to iterate very quickly on software and ship it quickly to customers and consumer devices. How do you start bringing some of that into a really safety-oriented culture and environment so that you can move fast, but you're also not breaking the foundations that are so critical? That's a very interesting problem that I hadn't seen before. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that the auto industry has faced in the last few years. Is trying to transition towards that more of a faster, CI/CD type of approach, agile development. Because my background, I'm an engineer by training. I spent 17 years working on software and electronic control systems in the auto industry.
Oh, great! Yeah, that's
back in the 90s and up until 2007.
Sure.
But the way we did software then was very different. Once you delivered software for started production of a program, that software didn't change anymore. Then you'd start working on the next program. And
now you've got OTAs and it's a great point. And I think, you think of a company like Apple, people buy the device and then really like features, it continues for many years and there's that expectation. I think we're trying to do that in auto, and you're spot on that what we're thinking a lot about is like, how do you get your software more modular, isolated, so that you can really separate out the things that are kind of safety critical from stuff that's more like user facing content, the kinds of things you would expect to be updated more frequently in the vehicle. That's really hard because a lot of this stuff has been, kind of monolithic for a while, right? Like very not modular. And so, many of the things we're doing is not just bringing in processes like CI/CD, but re-looking at the code base and figuring out, hey, how do we separate these things out? How do we shift left with our testing so that you can bring kind of that software experience into auto, but not really break what is sort of core and foundational to auto as well. It's interesting. I mean, it's like, I don't think I would have coming in, that wasn't like top of mind for me. I don't think I would have kind of understood that until I was here at the company and saw it.
Yeah, and of course, you mentioned, the safety critical aspect of it. Because the challenge, it's one thing, for a consumer electronics device, if there's a software bug or something doesn't work, it's an annoyance, and
pull the plug out.
It can be disruptive, but it doesn't usually kill people.
Yeah, you don't want to get a software update and then your brake system fails.
Exactly.
Right? And there's also a lot of regulatory, which there's there needs to be. And so, safety things, regulatory emissions, all those kinds of things those are table stakes. You cannot break those things. And I think, as software gets more in forefront in the vehicle, in the past, a lot of that software is embedded. There were a lot of tier providers that kind of did black boxes, and a company like GM didn't have a lot of visibility into actually what the software was doing and a lot of control of that. And so that's another area where we're like, hey, if we have to have end-to-end control of the software, we better have better visibility and quite frankly, more ownership of some of the key code bases as well. Because you can imagine, if you're building a consumer electronics device and you really don't write most of the code and you just integrate it, it's really hard to move kind of those modern software delivery platforms. You can't really leverage those techniques. So that's another challenge I think that we're trying to work through as well.
So, obviously GM has had its challenges with software in the last couple of years. Several of the products that launched over the last 3 years have had software issues, to put it gently. Most prominently the Blazer EV last year.
Yeah, the stop sale on the Blazer EV.
Yeah. So how, in the time that you've been with GM, how have you seen the processes change? Or I guess, what would you say were the things that GM was doing wrong, and how have those changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I can really only speak from end of 23, and I think the Blazer EV stop sale, maybe Mallory keep me honest here,
it was December of 23.
Yeah, somewhere right around then. Yeah, and I think it was hard. I think it was the right thing for the company to do, because I think it was one of those situations where we had to take a step back and really say, like, what's going on here? And I think what we found is that we were building a lot of the right software. We just didn't have some of the processes in place to catch stuff and automate and, quite frankly, get the quality that we needed out the door. And so the things we spent a lot of time on, and we did this mostly through all of last year, and I think the results speak for themselves. I think, we haven't had stop sales from software. We've shipped a bunch of EVs, great reviews. So I feel proud of that. But what we found was, for example, we didn't have enough end-to-end testing. And so we built out quality labs where we had hardware benches across the world where developers could log into them. We built Jenkins-style farms for being able to automate and run tests against the hardware. We started doing similar things with actual vehicles for testing. Then we started bringing that discipline to more of a test-driven development for the developers, where instead of writing code and kind of throwing over to the fence into the final release, we started saying, hey, no, you've got to write tests with your code. You have unit tests, you have to have functional tests, integration testing. We put gates in development so that tests would catch things before they could get checked in. We cleaned up Git repositories. We had bug review boards. I mean, all the kinds of things I think, you maybe would take for granted in the software industry and big tech. We brought a lot of that process. And I think, it was painful at first because you slowed everyone down. But then I think, you see the results of that coming out, because I think too much of what we were doing, we were relying on a bit of a hero culture and manual people to find stuff. And we've really switched that to automation, test-driven, all the way from development to end-to-end. And so that's really what I think was the big revelation and the work we did as a result of that.
Yeah, I got to visit the software test lab in the basement of the Sloan building last summer.
Did you meet Abdul on the team?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, okay, great.
Spent some time chatting with him.
He's leading a lot of that stuff, which is
that lab was very impressive. Cool. And the way it was set up, basically having essentially an entire EE architecture for each vehicle type, each configuration.
Exactly.
And
that's right. And we're virtualizing a lot of stuff too. Mm-hmm. So we're using cloud, and we're running virtual hardware models for even hardware that doesn't exist today, so that we can run 20, 30,000 regression tests overnight, where you get ahead of even having to use the hardware. So by the time you're actually on hardware, you're testing the things that you can really only do in hardware. Maybe that's timing related bugs. Maybe that's you actually need the specs of the hardware. And so again, the more of that we add, then quite frankly, by the time you get that software release ready, you feel pretty buttoned up that you've caught issues. So, but you know how it is. You can always test more.
Yeah. There's never enough testing.
Never enough.
But
a lot of progress there.
Yeah. As one of my managers early in my career told me, at some point there comes a point in every project where you've got to shoot the engineers and get on with the job.
Yeah. At some point you're like, we got to ship it. We could be the rest of our lives and not ship anything. So,
but it's finding that defining what is the minimum viable product for a particular application, in this case, a car, and it's obviously very different than it is for a phone or a laptop.
Exactly. And that's, I think, for me personally, not only a good learning experience, but also what I think is really interesting here is that, there is that line where you're like, oh, that's safety critical, or that's regulatory or emissions or whatever it is. And it really makes you think a little bit differently about just applying that usual train of kind of how you do software, and you have to make those trade-offs. So, also with vehicles, there's just a lot of hardware. There's a lot of kinetic pieces that you don't have in a phone, say, example, or whatever consumer electronic devices, where there's a lot of physics at play, quite frankly. And so thinking about physical simulations, how do you test stuff where you need to have, wheels moving on a road or various sort of physical interactions. That's another interesting space that, we've got ideas, but there's, I think, more we can do there as well. Sure.
So, at this point in January 2025, do you feel like that you've got the right kinds of processes in place and the right organization to be able to successfully move forward and continue, developing modern automotive software?
I do. I feel like what we did in 24, and I think Mary talked about this, was focus on the foundations, quality, safety, and execute and get that machine going. I think what we're seeing now, and we did, you probably know, we did some organizational changes. A lot of that was, quite frankly, driven by the fact that GM hadn't had all of software together in an organization. And so a bunch of different places came in, and you had overlap, you had, people with the same skill. So we had to do some big changes around that. So I feel like right now, we're pretty settled as far as that goes. I think that what we're trying to do this year is you got to continue to execute, but we're pushing a little bit more harder on the innovation. So we think about autonomous vehicles, Super Cruise, that developing. We're trying to think about, maybe rethinking what's the in-vehicle experience look like, and trying to make maybe something that's a little bit more GM specific or GM branded across our vehicle fleet. Obviously AI, everyone's talking about AI. I think we're trying to figure out what's the hype versus what's reality, because just because you can do it with AI, not clearly you want to throw it into a vehicle, quite frankly. And so again, a lot more focus now of all right, let's think about innovating now that we have a lot of the foundations in place. I think we're going to continue to evolve. There'll probably be more changes that we need to do and different focus, but I feel settled, right, in a way that I certainly didn't feel.
You think the team is set up in the right way now and has the right
right
tools that it needs to move forward?
I think so. And we're continuing to bring new stuff in, but I think I feel like now I've started, I got a foundation of a house, right? You can kind of keep building on that, where I don't think we were at that place maybe 8 months ago, quite frankly.
And you mentioned, doing more testing with virtual hardware. And that was something that we talked about when I toured the lab last summer, that they were really kind of just getting started with that, with having virtual versions of next generation ECUs and domain controllers and everything to test on that before you get the physical hardware. That's something that you're doing now. You've got that set up now.
Yeah, we are doing that now. Actually, just saw a demo last week in Milford, where we're ramping that up at scale for a lot of the pieces at the mechatronics layer, which is pretty cool. As you know, like, there's different levels of fidelity of virtualization for hardware. If you want it to be, gate accurate, it runs a lot slower, cycle accurate versus, say, functionally correct. So we're now thinking about, for the different use cases, okay, what's the fidelity of the model that you need, what matters. But now we have that platform in place. We're going to continue leveraging it across the software stack. I think, quite frankly, the other area that we're really pushing is, which is probably no surprise, like infotainment, right? A lot of that stuff is Android based, that kind of thing. You can pretty readily run virtualized for development as well as test in the infotainment space.
That was the next topic area I wanted to delve into, because you mentioned the in-vehicle experience. Obviously, GM has transitioned to an Android Automotive-based infotainment system across most of its vehicles now. And one of the more controversial decisions of the last couple of years was the decision to move away from supporting smartphone projection, at least on the EVs. Generally, I've actually been kind of supportive of that idea, because smartphone projection adds a whole another layer of complexity to things. When you've got an external device that you have to deal with. But there is still some functionality that's missing from that. I think overall, the GM system works pretty well, but there are some things where you still need to have the phone as part of that ecosystem. How's that working out? I guess obviously, I assume you're probably not entirely satisfied with it, but what's the path forward for infotainment at GM?
Yeah. So, and if it's okay, let me touch a little bit on the CarPlay aspect, because it does come up a lot, and just so you get my thoughts on it. Look, I get why CarPlay was successful and why people like it. I think our view is that we fundamentally believe you can build a better customer experience in the software when you're native and you're close to the hardware. Exposing features, just having like a unified interface that people aren't jumping in and out of depending on what device you have in the car. I also think, quite frankly, if you're spending tens of thousands of dollars on a vehicle, like I think people deserve and should expect to have a pretty awesome experience in the vehicle. One analogy I like to give is, remember back in the original smartphone days, specifically with the iPhone, it was going to be all web apps, and that was how we were going to do it. And then, they banned Flash, right? And then they found out and they started running native app stores. And a lot of that was, besides business reasons, was because, didn't want to be beholden to a third party in its standards. You didn't want to wait for the slowness of like web standards to adopt new features. You want to take advantage of the native hardware. And so I think the same kind of thing is really what's motivating here. It's just a native is just going to be a better experience for the customers. So I would say that's kind of my view of CarPlay. I think we've made really great strides there. I think the reviews of GM software experience has been quite positive. I do think there's more we can do, and we're going to do more. I want, and I mentioned this a little bit at the top of our discussion, we've hired some new software designers who are coming in and really stepping back and rethinking, like, what should the vehicle experience look like, right? What would a more native experience look like? And starting to prototype that. We've also, we're thinking hard about, everyone has these devices. So what's the right seamless interaction model so that it does feel a lot more like it's connected to you as opposed to something that you jump in and out of between those two screens. So can't give a lot of details on the product roadmap there, but it is definitely top of mind and things that we're working on. And you expect to see in our vehicles, hopefully not too distant future.
And, one of the reasons I think why smartphone projection did become popular in the middle part of the last decade, both CarPlay and Android Auto, is because native infotainment systems, like other electronic systems in the vehicle, were static. Once the
Yeah.
vehicle rolled off the line, it never changed for the life of that vehicle for the most
Yeah,
part.
and you're right. And the feature set and the trend line for that was so much more than it was what you're seeing in the vehicle. I think that's turning around. I would also say, one of the frustrations that I have with something like CarPlay is that you kind of end up with like the lowest common denominator because by definition it has to work everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you have something you want to do, you got to get it to work for everything. And so I think that's why we really feel like that trend line, we kind of crossed that, and we have a lot of upside in terms of that experience. So I think you're spot on though in terms of why it was so popular and it took off. Absolutely.
So, just to kind of wrap up around this part of the discussion, obviously you can't talk about specifics, but I think one of the areas that's missing from the current Android Automotive experience, is messaging, and if regardless of whether you're an iPhone user or an Android user like I am,
the whole blue versus green.
Yeah, but
Xbox Windows. Yeah.
I mean, with when I plug my phone into a vehicle that's got Android Automotive, I can get message notifications on the screen, and you can get that through Bluetooth with the Android Automotive experience. But do you see areas like messaging and maybe an expansion of some of the available streaming apps, for example, in the Play Store, coming to that experience?
Yeah, without kind of the specifics, I think that's exactly the kind of thing we want to do. We recognize that, those devices are very personal and their life's in it. And so we want an experience when you sit in the car that it kind of seamlessly works together and it doesn't feel clunky. And the kind of the key features that maybe your phone provides, like those should be available and seamless in the vehicle. We're spending a lot of time. I think a lot of that is trying to figure out what's the interaction model and a lot of the design. The other aspect of this too is like safety. You got to be careful, like messaging in the car.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a keyboard? I mean, you don't want distracted driving. And so again, kind of back to the original part of the conversation with safety is like, how do we have this experience in front of your face, but bring that functionality to the screen so that you're not distracted? And I think, again, that's an area where it's like kind of new for me. That's a different way of thinking about stuff. But I think you're totally right with that. And that's again, the areas that we're really trying to figure out how to do that safely and do it well.
Okay.
Because you can imagine easy things you would do, but not sure that would be a good or safe experience,
right,
quite frankly, for the driver.
Yeah.
Maybe when you have a lot more autonomy in the car in that future, then it's a different story as well, but certainly not at this point.
Yeah. In fact, if I can have a text message read to me and reply to it by voice, that's something that has worked pretty well for me for a long time with protection.
That's pretty solid. And I'll tell you, like voice is definitely, like voice control is an area we're looking at, and not surprising with all the new LLMs out there and ChatGPT, like the kind of stuff that you can do there is, orders of magnitude better than it was even a few years ago, right? And so we're exploring those options, and then you get into a very interesting space of like, well, all these models can do really cool stuff, but it's like, does it make sense in a car? Like, is that what the consumer wants, or is it just like a flashy thing that you could add? But it is a fun space to be in because you're starting to say like things that weren't possible maybe 10 years ago are suddenly like maybe a possibility, right? So more than just reading back something.
Yeah.
Right?
So what do you see as some of the potentially useful applications of AI or LLMs in the vehicle?
In the vehicle, I mean, I think probably the most obvious one is really a pretty killer. Sorry, I may have the wrong word to use. A pretty awesome digital voice assistant, I think, is the obvious one. And I think that's for, think about being able to control and do things in your car with your voice, as opposed to having to find a menu or click a button or something like that. And I don't think voice mode is something that maybe people want all the time, but boy, it'd be pretty great to do things like maybe roll the back windows down a little bit, or hey, can you adjust the the comfort settings. I mean, a whole bunch of stuff. I think just basic controls around the vehicle and stringing things together that might be multiple processes to do in a vehicle to get what you want, I think are much easier to do, where before it was like, it didn't really understand you, it wouldn't do the right thing. And if it wasn't perfectly programmed as a sequence of things to do, it wouldn't do it, where an LLM can generalize. And so I think you don't have to bake into a whole bunch of canned use cases. You can give potentially the model access to a lot of the controls of the system, and it can adapt and do what you ask it to. I think that's pretty exciting. So that's kind of where I think the most obvious area we're looking. I mean, the other one is obviously, self-driving autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing. And you see really now these end-to-end models and these foundational models for robotics, that's really where the industry is going for that stuff too, as opposed to more of the rule-based systems. So all this technology, I think, are kind of converging in the vehicle. Without rambling on, the last point with AI is there's a lot of internal stuff in the enterprise too. So how we develop software and test it, manufacturing, logistics, that's quite frankly, I think where a lot of the impact is happening today, sort of in the enterprise and manufacturing.
One last question on the AI front.
Sure.
Is that, do you see the potential for having the models running locally on device in the vehicle as opposed to running in the cloud?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure everyone's reading about DeepSeek recently, right? What's happening there. And so, our view has always been, and I think this is not just with AI, is like, when you go from off vehicle on vehicle, that connectivity link, how do you have an experience that isn't jarring when you lose connectivity? And I think now that models are getting smaller, I think ideally you have that stuff on the vehicle, because there is a lot of compute power on the vehicle compared to a phone. The thermal is different. Your operating parameters are very different. I also think though that there's probably always going to be a need maybe for huge models in the cloud. And so what we're thinking about is like, hey, what's kind of that hybrid world look like? Maybe some things happen on the vehicle, some things go offline as a hybrid sort of way of doing things. Yeah.
Okay. One last thing. Any final thoughts on what's the next big thing that you want to tackle in terms of automotive software at GM? Yeah,
I think we touched on a few things, but I think a big focus these days is around this software-defined vehicle. There's really this new architecture where, instead of a traditional electrical architecture you have in a vehicle, now you've got something that looks a lot more like a PC, where you've got, CAN is behind aggregators. You're using Ethernet between those aggregators. You've got a central upgradable compute. So a lot of what we're focusing on is this new electrical architecture, and then the software stack on top of that. That's going to be, for the next 15, 10, 20 years out. That then really does enable you to do more feature and software when you have kind of that more, I would guess, modern architecture underneath the car. So that's a lot of our focus on the innovation front will be in that space.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and hopefully we get to chat many more times in the future.
You bet. Hey, thanks so much for the time. It was great to meet you, and happy to chat anytime.